All right, let's get started with the clam chowder demo. We're demoing clam chowder, so hopefully you have your recipe that you've accessed, and we'll go over the recipe as I demo. I have a whole bunch of mise en place sitting out here, lots of things ready to get chopped and diced and measured. All my ingredients out, quite a long list today for our chowder. I have my trusty soup pot or my stock pot ready to go as well, but I don't even want to think about that yet because I have so much knife work to do. I want to make sure that all my knife work is done before I get heat onto my pot, just like last time. So I'm not trying to cool my pot down while I got things maybe burning and I need to start cutting things. So I want to focus on all my knife cuts, get everything measured, get everything that I'm going to need before I even turn on that heat. So let's just get to it. My first item on my list is that I need 2 ounces of bacon. I'm going to skip that because I do need quite a few vegetables, and I want to get vegetables on my cutting board first, and then I'm going to end with the bacon. Because when I'm done with the bacon, I'm just going to wash my board anyway. Then I don't have to like stop and wash my board and do all that. Bacon definitely gets things nice and greasy, so I don't want to start with bacon and then maybe like have to wash everything or do all that. So I'm going to save it to the last. So what I can do is think about my butter. So my butter, I'm going to need 3 tablespoons of butter. I already have my butter cut in 2 tablespoons here. So 3 of these tablespoons. I know I'm going to need them right in my pot when I start, so I'm just going to toss them into my pot right there and set them aside, but I have 3 tablespoons of butter. I'm also going to need a 1/4 cup of flour. So in this chowder, we're going to be making a roux with our butter and our flour and a little bit of our bacon fat. But for this, I'm going to need a 1/4 cup of flour, AP flour. Using the back of the knife to scrape that level. Set that aside. One thing I like about setting all my ingredients out and then mise en placing, I can put everything away as I go through it. And then hopefully I can have a nice clean countertop when I'm done. Okay, small diced yellow onion. Moving on to the yellow onion. So we saw the yellow onion with lemon chicken soup. We'll see it again here with chowder. So just a reminder of how we're going to get that nice small dice of yellow onion. We're going to need half a cup of our small diced yellow onion. Cut the top off, and then I'll just trim the bottom. Remember that you want some of that root left on there to help hold all of our onion layers intact. Cut it in half. And then now we can peel it. All right, half an onion here. I'm ready to get my small dice, 1/2 cup small diced yellow onion. Remembering, this is soup. We want to make sure that our small dice is nice and small dice, and then we'll kind of mimic that same small dice with any other vegetable that we have to do. So I have the half onion. I've cut the root off. I've trimmed the root off here because I want to leave that here to keep all my layers intact. So I'll make that lateral kind of rainbow cut, start at kind of the angle, work my way around. Do not cut into the root, cut towards the roots. The closer these cuts are together, the smaller your dice will be. The further apart, the further they'll be. Then now I turn it because I've made all those cuts in there for all my little fingers here, pages. And then now I can make these into dices. And then as this bit gets harder to hold on to, I flip it over and find the new flat spot. So once because this surface area on the bottom is starting to get narrower and narrower naturally, well, it's going to get a little slippier, harder to hold on, a little difficult for my claw. So I'll just flip it over and find the larger of the area here that it has to lay on. and then I can cut around the roots. So keep that in mind. If you ever get to the point of the onion or a vegetable of any kind and it's harder to hang on to, just flip it over to its other flat side that you've created, and it might make hanging onto it a little bit easier. Oops, don't want this guy. So this again can go into a stock pot. I don't want it in my chowder. I've got that heaping half cup. I don't want to waste this little bit that's left over. And now small diced celery for the same amount, half cup as well. Half cup of small diced celery. Keeping in mind our consistency of cuts, we want to keep a similar cut. It's a little wider there, so I'll give it one more cut. I've already washed and trimmed this celery, so it's ready for cutting. Just like before, I'll add this guy in there. Better to add that in my soup and then make it waste. My onion and my celery can hang out together. I've got them in the same prep bowl here. I can keep my onion and celery in the same bowl. And I can move on to chopped garlic. Last time garlic was in a separate bowl, and we want the same here because we don't want it to be sweating and cooking with the bigger vegetables that I have. So my garlic, fresh chopped garlic, 1 tablespoon. 1 tablespoon here. Maybe one more big guy. That'll be it. So my board is to the edge of my counter like last time. I can pull my garlic kind of towards the edge, give it a whack to get that paper off of there. So then now those ends come off. This one's got a little bit of an impurity, just kind of a bad spot on it. I'm just going to trim that off quickly. The rest of it is okay. So I like to cut them in half. Take a look. Is that germ need to be out of there? Is it nice and big? If it's small, like I've said at the other demo, if it's, oops, oh no, if it's too small, probably not quite worth your time, but if it's getting a little bit bigger, you can get it out of there. That's a good one. I wish this would focus any better. Does anybody have any tips on focusing my camera better? Okay. So now I'll have them in half, so I'll go through and smash them one more time, get them nice and flat so I can start chopping them. And then now I can chop them. So this recipe, just a chop. So if I have a little bit bigger pieces of garlic, that's okay, because I'm going to be cooking this in a chowder. Last time I cooked it into a soup, and if it was a little bit bigger, that's okay, because I cook it down. I don't want big giant pieces, because even if I have big giant pieces as I'm cooking it down, it's still going to just be a little overpowering with garlic if someone were to grab that into a bite. But I also want to consider if I'm doing things with garlic where it's not cooked or has minimal cooking. I want to make sure that my garlic gets really quite small so that people aren't eating giant chunks of just raw garlic. If it's, like I said, if it's being served raw or if it's got minimal cooking, I do want to consider the size of the garlic for that end product. Somebody just kind of biting into a piece of garlic, that doesn't sound very nice. And it's also going to just overpower their taste buds. If I have someone eating giant bits of garlic, raw or cooked, it tends to just overpower the palate, and then that's all you taste is garlic for the rest of your meal probably. So you want to make sure that garlic does get pretty small here, but I am cooking this, so this is just small enough, just a nice chop. Okay, moving on to yellow potatoes. So chowder is chowder because I usually have some sort of diced potato in there. I like to use yellow potatoes, Yukon yellow potatoes. They stay nice and firm and they don't tend to fall apart in your soup. Red potatoes are also a really good option. You can use red potatoes. Some people use red potatoes and leave the skin on. That's fine as well. Russets are okay. They just tend to kind of break down and fall apart once they're in the soup for a little bit longer. So 1 cup of diced yellow potato. So how am I going to get a dice out of this largely roly-poly vegetable? Well, first I'm going to peel it. And then just as I talked about with the carrot, and just like with my onion, I want to get a flat spot. So I want to focus on getting a dice out of here, but I really want to not have to worry too much about cutting my fingers. So I want to be really safe when I do that. So I'm going to get a flat spot. So find a spot where it's somewhat stable for you to get that. That side feels a lot better. So I'm just going to shave off the end there. I'll still be able to dice that. But now I have this nice flat spot to where I can be cutting and I don't have to worry about this potato rolling everywhere. So I'll cut these planks, if you will, maybe pages, planks. And then now these become sticks. I'll stack them on top of each other. You can do that minimally. The higher you go, the more slippery it is, because they are kind of slippery on top of each other, so be careful, or if you want to not stack, you can do that. Now these guys go into sticks. And again, being aware of how big you're making your dice. You want a nice small dice here. Because I'm going to be putting this into my chowder. So I, number 1, want potatoes that are finished and done and not crunchy and raw. And then even sizes, so everything looks nice and pretty next to each other. So they're all nice and even sizes. And I don't have potatoes that are like really teeny tiny that disintegrate and you can't see them anymore. And the potatoes that are really big, or potatoes that have just kind of like a wonky shape to them. So then now these sticks become dices. And then now I have a really nice dice. Looks like this 1 potato is going to be more than enough. This recipe, I have pared this recipe down quite a bit. I used to make this in a lot of the clubs that I worked at, and I used to make gallons and gallons and gallons at a time. So this recipe is easily doubled or tripled or even quadrupled if you are really wanting to feed a large amount of people. So you can certainly make more of this if you wish to. But I don't know that I would go any smaller than what it already is. It's already been pared down quite a bit. So just like before, I have a little bit of this potato left. Instead of wasting this, I'm just going to use it. I'm going to be cooking my potatoes in a separate pot. So I'm going to get them into that pot just to get them off my cutting board, and I don't need to dirty another prep bowl. Let me get some water on them real quick. So I'm going to cook these separately. I'm not going to cook them in the chowder. I'll talk about that when I get to that point in the chowder. But I did want to mention that if you want to make this chowder and you think, oh, that's a lot of knife work, I can't do that all in one day, you can do your prep and your mise en place the day before. Go ahead and consider doing mise en place the day before, and that's really helpful because you can get all of your knife work done the day before. You can get your onions and your celery cut up, you can get your garlic cut up, bacon, potatoes, your butter, your herbs, get all your liquids measured out, and that's really helpful. So the next day you just can go into the kitchen and execute and make some chowder. But my only 2 cents on that is if you do your potatoes ahead of time, peel them, dice them, but then store them in something with water underwater. So whether it's in that same pot you're going to cook in, put them in the refrigerator with water, but you want to have them with water, covered with water, so that they don't what we call rust or get brown, or they start to oxidize. So when the potatoes are peeled and exposed to air, they tend to oxidize and get that rusty color, but covering them with water will help that. So make sure they get covered with water if you want to do some mise en place the day before. Okay, moving on to some fresh herbs here. Fresh thyme. Fresh thyme for 2 teaspoons. 2 teaspoons fresh thyme. So we've used our thyme stems for stock before, and I used parsley last week for lemon chicken, but for our thyme we wanted to just use the leaves that are on here. We don't want the stem. The stem tends to be, especially at the end, really, really woody, and it's not very tasty. So just the leaves. And how I do that is I can see the leaves are kind of growing up this way, and I just kind of grab the bottom and pull back to get those leaves off of there. I don't really want the bottom part of the stem, because if you have thyme in your hand, you can usually feel that the top is pretty pliable and kind of moves around, but the bottom part gets really woody and sticky, stick-like. And I don't want that. It doesn't matter how much I cut it, I still end up with little teeny tiny pieces of like wood or stick in my whatever I'm making, in my chowder. So I want to avoid getting that bottom bit of herb or thyme. Thyme's a big one that has woody ends on it. Rosemary really has a woody stalk to it as well. So if the top, as you're picking the leaves off, and the top kind of just pops off with that same gentle pressure that you're using to pull the leaves off, then the top is just gentle enough that it's fine. But you'll notice that the bottom is a little bit harder, so you want to avoid getting that in your soup there. We talked a lot about herbs, and we know that we want to add our fresh herbs that we have here. At the end of cooking, we want to make sure that we keep that nice, fresh, vibrant flavor and their nice bright green color that they have. We want to keep that, so we'll add it at the end of cooking. A lot of these stems get really small. Thyme is sometimes not the favorable herb to be picking because it is tedious, time consuming. All right, I got a few dustings here of leaves. Put those in there. So as mentioned before, if you've got a stalk going or something, I got what I needed out of the thyme. I got all those leaves off, and now I'm left with all these stems. So you could certainly put that in a stalk if you had one going. I unfortunately do not. So a nice gentle chop here. I would not gather these up like I did the parsley. It's just far too small. It gets to be kind of a little dangerous there with your fingers, but just a nice gentle chop. Making sure that we're not overly chopping them. Start to over chop them. Our thyme is a really big culprit of getting black if it's over chopped. So we want to make sure that we're not over chopping the thyme. It does not like it. See if I can get this in there. Fresh parsley, same amount, 2 teaspoons. 2 teaspoons of fresh parsley. It's going to go into the same container. I'm going to be adding all my fresh herbs at the end. Going to bunch them up like I did with my lemon chicken soup. that gentle sawing motion. My knife is never leaving the board here. There's always some point of contact with the board in that sawing motion. All right, 2 teaspoons of fresh thyme to be added at the end of my cooking. All right, I think we're ready for some bacon. So the recipe calls for 2 ounces of bacon, 2 ounces. So I am going to use a scale because I have it, and then we'll kind of shake it out to see how many slices it is. It's probably going to be like a slice and a half or 2 slices. But in the classroom, I definitely like for you guys to get your hands on some scales if you have them. And in classroom, we do have them, but at home you may not have them. But we'll see what they are for slices here. But like I said, it's usually about 2 slices. Yes, 2 slices of bacon got me 2 ounces exactly. So if you don't have a scale, you could just count for 2 slices of bacon. Sanitize it. So for cutting my bacon, I want to be really careful because this is fatty bacon. All bacon's got some fat on it. It tends to get a little slimy, so I just want to be careful that I'm not going to slip or have an accident here. I like to make sure I separate them. They seem to get pretty compacted into that package. And then I will cut it in half because, again, it's a lot easier to just focus on half of it at a time. And then I'm going to cut this guy in half down lengthwise. And then making sure that I am actually cutting it in half. Bacon can sometimes be really difficult to cut. You could put it in the freezer for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 minutes or so. If it's frozen, it's a little easier to cut. But you can kind of see this sawing that I'm kind of doing, and I'm just trying to make sure that I'm actually cutting it in half, and I'm not just running my knife through it, and then sometimes it doesn't get that cut all the way through. You end up with that caterpillar cut. So then now I just stacked them all together. Slowly, you can see I'm slowly cutting them. I've got them all pushed together here with my fingers. You can also notice that I'm pushing them away gently to make sure that I have cut them. Because oftentimes what you get is this thing where they're not exactly all cut. So making sure that you get them all cut up there. And now I have 2 ounces or 2 slices of bacon. So I think I'm done with my cutting board. I'm going to get this washed up and we'll come back and measure our liquids. All right, let's take a look at the liquids that we need for our chowder. Chowder is going to be dairy based most likely. I've got some heavy cream and some milk here. Then I also have clam juice, so I like to get some sort of juice or stock of maybe what I'm putting in there if I can help it. So milk, a cup and a quarter of milk. Just like always, making sure that we're using the appropriate measuring device, liquids for liquids, and then using them appropriately. Keeping them on the counter, bring your eyes down to it. Cup and a quarter of milk. Heavy cream. This one is heavy cream. I have 1 cup of heavy cream here. And then I'm also going to need 1 cup of clam juice. So I'm just going to add this on top of this that I have already to make a total of 2 cups. So I have 1 cup of heavy cream and 1 cup of clam juice. Excellent. And then I can't forget the chopped clams. So chopped clams, you can get these frozen and you can get these canned, but we only need half a cup. Half a cup of chopped clams. So you can definitely find canned chopped clams at the grocery store, kind of where you would find like canned tuna fish. So you can find that there. And it comes in a small can, so you usually just need like a can per recipe. Pretty easy. And same with the clam juice. You can still find clam juice at the grocery store. They usually sell just little jars of it, perfect for a one-time recipe here. All right, so I have all of my mise en place. I have my butter in the pan, my bacon, my flour, onion and celery, my garlic, my liquids, and my herbs, my clams, kind of putting them in order as I'm going to put them into my pot here so I can be a little orderly. Got my stirring utensil. So now I'm ready to go. I can start with some heat on my pan and get ready to make my chowder. Okay, so for my steps here, my first blank, so in a large pot over medium heat, melt the butter. So in a large pot, again, I have that same stock pot with a lot of surface area on the bottom. I want something with lots of surface area so everything doesn't get jumbled on top of each other and it has lots of contact surface with the hot bottom here. So I'm going to melt this butter over medium heat, and I want to do this gently, and I don't want to burn the butter. I can easily burn this butter if my heat is too high. So if it immediately starts to spit and spatter, I do not want that. You may also notice that I didn't preheat my pan and then put my butter in. My butter's been in here. That was one of the first things I did in mise en place, was just put my butter in here with no heat. So don't preheat your pan. Heat your pan with your butter and make sure that we have a nice gentle melting on this, a nice gentle heat so that it doesn't burn. So once melted, we're going to cook the bacon till fat has rendered out and bacon is golden brown. So what does that mean, fat has rendered out? This butter is melted and it's getting a little sizzly. That's a good indicator. It's a good time to add my bacon here. It's hot enough. So make sure I stir this around and then keep an eye on that heat. Keep an eye on the heat. If it's getting too hot, if my bacon is starting to burn, I want to turn that down. Clam chowder, if you've ever seen clam chowder before, think about what color it is. What color is clam chowder? It's white. So if I'm burning things at this first stage, that is going to carry through to my finished product, and I'm going to have chowder that is maybe a little brown or specks of brown, and maybe not that really pretty, pristine white that I'm looking for here. So cooking this bacon until fat has rendered out, what does that mean? That means that the fat is cooking out. The fat is cooking out of the bacon. So that I'll still have, fat on the bacon, but it's letting go of its fat and kind of putting it into a liquid form here in my pan. So that with the combination of the butter that I have and the fat from the bacon is giving me enough fat, so when I add my flour, I can make a really nice, perfect roux. So I want that really nice roux. So reading ahead, my first blank was butter, so I melted the butter, and then I'm cooking the bacon till fat has rendered out and golden brown. Make sure not to brown too much. Like I said, if this gets too brown, too dark, I'm burning the butter. It's going to end up in my finished product. I'll see that and probably taste it. Then, once I've rendered some of this fat and this bacon has become a little bit brown, I'm going to add my onions and celery. So blanks 3 and 4, onions and celery. I'll add onions and celery, cook until translucent. So I want to sweat my onions and celery technically. So I'll get them into the hot pot, coated in the hot oil, and then they will stop being this nice vibrant white or green and then become a little see-through or translucent. But I just want to make sure that I'm not getting things, like I've said before, too hot, because I want to give this bacon a head start to kind of brown, but I do know that I still need to put this onion and celery in the pan, and that needs to also just sweat. We're not going to caramelize these items here, the vegetables here like we did with our lemon chicken soup. We're going to let them sweat and get translucent, but I still need to consider that while this is in here sweating and getting translucent, the bacon is still in here cooking. The butter is still in here cooking. It's not like the butter and the bacon say, oh, we're done, we can take a pause now. They're still in this hot environment. They're going to continue to brown. So this is a great time to add my onion and celery because I'm seeing lots of foam. And you may see that it's just a hair brown. I'm getting a little bit of color on the bottom of my pan. That's okay. I don't want too much color. Now that I've added those vegetables, I am cooling the pan down. The pan now is kind of cooling down and going to work to heat itself back up. So that's kind of saving me from that bacon overheating or getting too hot. But like I said, it's still going to continue to cook and brown while my vegetables get translucent or while they're sweating. So just keep that in mind. Even though I'm focusing and I want to make sure that my vegetables get translucent, I still have bacon in there that's doing their thing. It's not going to stop just because I've added other vegetables. So once my onion and celery get translucent, I'm going to add the garlic. Remember that we're not adding them at the same time because this is going to get burnt while this is still just sweating. So this will hang out. This gets a little time out while this is still doing its business. So this will catch up later. So once translucent, add the garlic and cook just a few minutes. And then I can add my flour to make my roux. So while this is sweating and getting translucent, let's take a look at our potatoes that are in my small pot here. So I said I was going to cook these potatoes in a smaller pot on the side, and I certainly will do that. I just have these here. I also have a strainer ready to strain when they get done. So I'm just going to cook these separately on the side, small pot. So I have a small pot and I also have a small amount of liquid. I don't need to fill this entire pot full of water to get my potatoes to cook. So I have a small pot. My water line is right here. It's just covering the potatoes. I want my water line to cover the potatoes. That's what I want. But I don't need that to be super full. The fuller my pot is with water, the longer it's going to take for it to come up to a boil. And I really just want that water to come to a boil. I'll keep an eye on it and reduce it down to so it's kind of a simmer, so it doesn't beat up my potatoes. But I want to make sure that it cooks my potatoes on the side, and then once my potatoes are done and my chowder is at the right stage, I'll put them together. A little bit longer here to go for some translucent vegetables. They're getting really, really close though. All right, I definitely have some translucent looking vegetables. My onion is just starting to look a little bit more pale, and that's just exactly what I want to see. I don't really have a lot of color on the bottom of my pan. It's another good sign. I'm good to add my garlic. This isn't going to take very long. My pan is nice and warm. I just want this to get fragrant. And once it hits the heat in that hot oil or the hot fat, it won't take very long at all. All right, so now I can add my 1/4 cup of flour to get my roux going. So I really want to make sure that I'm getting all of this flour incorporated, that I don't have any dry clumps of flour. I don't have any dry flour up on the sides of the pot. And that my roux is equal parts of that fat and flour, and it tends to have kind of like a wet sand consistency. The longer I cook this, the toastier it'll be, but again, I want a white chowder. I don't want to cook this for very long because I want this to stay a nice white color. And then now I can follow with my liquid. So this is why it's also important to have all your liquid measured out, so that now when I want to cool this pan down and get liquid in it and I don't want my flour to be burning, I've got it right here, and then I don't have to worry about measuring it while my pan is heating and getting too hot. So I got a whisk, and this is the only time I like to use the whisk. It's because I have that flour in there, all that roux, and I just added the liquid, and the roux tends to want to clump up. And so I like to just get the whisk in here just to make sure that I'm breaking up those flour chunks of the roux. And then now I will get rid of it. I won't need this anymore, but I will keep my spatula because I want to make sure that I'm stirring frequently so I'm not getting a scorched bottom here. I want to see that steam is leaving the pan and that it's at that kind of a gentle simmer, but I definitely don't want this to boil. It's going to burn the bottom of the pan, scorch it. I don't want that. So I want a nice gentle heat on my chowder. It'll take a little while to heat up. It's not a huge volume amount, so it won't take terribly long. But I want to make sure that it doesn't boil. Little tiny bubbles are okay. Seeing steam leave is okay, but not too hot. If you had the time and you wanted to cook your potatoes in the chowder, this is the time that you would add those raw potatoes. My potatoes are now boiling. They're not going to take very long now. But if you wanted to cook potatoes in here, this is the time to add the potatoes. I don't like doing it, especially in the classroom setting, because we don't have a lot of time. The chowder or the cream, because we have cream in here, we have a gentle, slow heat, and it just takes a long time for those potatoes to cook thoroughly. So if you're doing it at home and you felt like you had lots of time, you can cook them in there. I don't have a lot of time like in class time, so I've just become accustomed to cooking them separately. So I want to make sure I cook these till soft, because I want these potatoes just soft enough. Not crunchy still, but not overly soft, so taste it. They need just a little bit longer. Almost there. So this chowder has a little bit to go still, and my potatoes are almost done. That's okay. My potatoes are going to hang out on the side, draining, while my chowder gets ready. I will just wait to add them, but that's okay if they're done early. So let's take a look back at our steps here. Then I had the onions and celery, and I cooked till translucent, and I added the garlic, and then I added my flour in the pot, mixed well and I mixed well so no flour clumps remain. And then your fifth blank is roux. So cook the roux for a few minutes and add the clam juice, milk, and heavy cream. So your fifth blank is roux. Cook the roux, R-O-U-X. So that's when I added the flour to my fat. My vegetables were in there too, but because I added flour to fat, I had a roux. And then the next one here, it talks about in a small pot, simmer the diced potatoes till soft. Your sixth blank is soft. In a small pot, simmer the diced potatoes till soft. Cook till roux has thickened in our chowder. So I want to cook my chowder till the roux is thickened. So it's going to take a little bit of time for this to kind of heat up. I can see a little bit of steam leaving the pot. And it's stirring it frequently. I like this spatula because this corner bit fits nicely in the corner of the pot here. And the roux, the flour, tends to want to sink down to the bottom. So you want to constantly be stirring it to kind of encourage that flour and that roux to be mixing in and thickening. So we're going to cook the chowder till roux has thickened, stirring constantly, making sure soup does not scorch. Turn the heat down if needed. Turn that down if needed. If you're seeing big bubbles, turn that down. And we can probably turn off our potatoes. Let's take another test here. Yeah, I think those are good to drain. I can drain my potatoes. And like I said, I'll let them hang out while I'm waiting for the chowder. Where's that going? So I just have them in the strainer. They're just sitting on top of their pot. They're just going to wait until this chowder gets thick. So this is going to take a little bit of time, like I said, for that flour to thicken. If you're standing here and stirring this constantly, it may take you a while to realize that it is even thickening. If you're just kind of standing there staring at the same thing over and over and over again, I have a lot of students that say, it's not thickening, nothing's happening. It's kind of just because you're standing there too long looking at it. Go take a break, take a walk, come back, and you might notice that it has changed. So like I said, if it doesn't look like it's doing much, give it some time. The flour will thicken. I can start to see more steam escape. That's good. I also don't see bubbles. I don't want to see boils. I can see maybe a little bit of tiny bubbles on the side would be okay, but I don't really want to see big bubbles. That's going to mean that it's scorching on the bottom and then eventually burning on the bottom. So I'm going to wait for this to thicken. And then once the chowder is thick, I'm going to add the clams and then let it come up to temp, because my clams, they're just chopped canned clams, so these are already cooked. So once my chowder is thick, I want to make sure I add my clams to the chowder and just kind of heat them up throughout. I don't want to add them early, because then that's how we get chewy, rubbery clams. They get overcooked. So like I said, they're already cooked. We're just going to make sure that we heat them in our chowder. So I'll let this chowder thicken, then I'll add my clams just to heat them up. All right, a few minutes have passed. Got small bubbles here. It's probably the limit I would take it for bubbles. I've turned it down as it's thickened and gotten hotter. It's got those bubbles, so I've turned it down as I've let it see it's thickened. So my ½ cup of clams. As I said, we're just heating these up. It's not going to take long. Those clams are, the size of my pinky nail. They're not very big. It won't take long to heat up. I just want to make sure that I am taking some time to stir them in by themselves to get heated. They're already cooked, so I don't want to overcook them. So my next steps here. So once the chowder is thick, add the clams and let them come to temp. Then add the drained and cooked potatoes. So I have my potatoes that are cooked and drained. I'll add those. My fresh herbs. And then season with salt and pepper. So that's the ingredient list has the salt and pepper TT, to taste. So I want to make sure that I know that is to taste. You can add as much or as little as you'd like, but if you need a place to start, I would do maybe 3/4 of a teaspoon of the salt, 3/4 teaspoon. The fat that we have in here and the heavy cream tends to kind of suck up the salt in a funny way, so it tends to take a little bit more salt. But the bacon we added is salty, so I might counterbalance it. And then I would say, I don't know, half a teaspoon of the pepper maybe, if you needed a place to start there. So make sure you stir it well before you taste. And then that's that last blank there, taste and adjust seasoning. Being in practice of making sure that we taste it. Be aware that we want to taste our food. We can grab a piece of potato, make sure that we have done finished potatoes. See what we need to adjust for seasoning. So in this case for seasoning would be our salt and pepper. That's what we would have to adjust later for our seasoning if we did not think it was flavorful in one way or another. And I think that's just what we need. So I'm going to turn this down, or off actually. So now we have nice thick chowder. Chunks of potatoes and bacon, a really nice white, bright color here. I did not overcook it at the beginning stages. And then for me, this is just a nice thickness. I like chowder that's a little thicker than it is runnier. So if you wanted chowder that was a little bit runnier that you prefer, you could add a little bit more clam juice or maybe hold back on some of the roux. But I think it's a little easier to thin it out with clam juice later than to try to thicken it back up with extra roux at the end. So you could always adjust your thickness by adding some clam juice if you wanted it a little bit thinner, if that is what you prefer. But there you have it. There is your clam chowder.